The priest smiled gently, his voice echoing through St. Jude's sunlit church. "If anyone here has cause to object to this union," he said, "speak now, or forever hold your peace." For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The air was thick with perfume and promise. Then, a single chair dragged across the marble floor, slicing through the silence like a blade. Every head turned. The bride's sister, the maid of honor, was on her feet. Her bouquet trembled in her shaking hands, petals scattering like fallen secrets. Her lips quivered, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried like thunder. I object." The words froze time itself. The groom's smile collapsed. The bride's veil fluttered as if the air itself recoiled. "I object," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Because this man betrayed me." Gas rippled through the church. The priest's Bible slipped from his hands. Somewhere the organ gave a single, discordant note before falling silent. And just like that, what was meant to be a wedding became a war of love, blood, and lies. One that would soon turn this sacred vow into a courtroom battlefield. Because sometimes the truth doesn't wait for confession. It stands up, uninvited, and tears everything apart. This is the story of how a sacred vow turned into a brutal courtroom war. A conflict that didn't just pit lover against lover, but sister against sister, and forced one woman to choose between the man she was about to marry and the family she was born into. What you are about to hear is a story of love, accusation, and the agonizing search for a truth that ultimately cost everyone everything. It's a reminder that the human heart is a far more complex and treacherous place than any courtroom, and that some verdicts, once rendered, can never truly be undone. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The opening notes of the wedding march had faded, leaving a reverent, anticipatory silence in the sun-drenched St. Jude's Church. At the altar stood Clara and David, a couple who seemed sculpted from success itself. Their love story was the stuff of modern legend among their colleagues. They had first met across the polished wood of a courtroom, opposing counsel in a complex corporate intellectual property dispute. Clara, representing a small, embattled startup, was all passion and fiery, eloquent rhetoric. David, defending a large established corporation, was a fortress of calm, unassailable logic. For 6 grueling weeks they battled, each earning the other's grudging respect with every motion filed and every objection sustained. It was after the trial, which ended in a surprising settlement brokered by their mutual admiration for each other's tactics, that David found her packing her briefcase and simply asked her for coffee. That coffee turned into a 4-hour conversation that spanned everything from obscure legal precedent to classic black and white films. Their romance blossomed amidst meticulously crafted legal arguments and takeout dinners eaten at their desks during late-night case preparations. Their partnership was built not just on affection, but on a profound intellectual fire and a shared, unyielding moral compass. Standing as the maid of honor was Clara's younger sister, Lena, a bright law student who, for the past year, had been living in the spare bedroom of their spacious, book-filled home. Clara had insisted on it, wanting to give her sister a stable, supportive environment to finish her degree, away from the chaos of student dorms. David had readily agreed, and he quickly fell into the role of a protective older brother, helping Lena with her dense coursework and offering invaluable career advice. To all outside observers, they were the perfect trio. Their shared home was filled with the aroma of home-cooked meals, lively dinner debates about legal ethics, and an unshakable sense of harmony. But perfection is often a fragile veneer, a beautiful painting that hides a flawed canvas. The priest smiled, his voice echoing through the hallowed space. "If anyone here has cause to object to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." A beat of expectant silence settled over the guests. Then a chair scraped against the cold stone floor, a sound that cut through the sanctity of the moment like a crack in a flawless diamond. Every head in the pews turned as one. Lena stood, her face a ghostly white, her hands shaking so violently that her maid of honor bouquet trembled, dropping a single white rose to the floor. Her voice, though barely a whisper, carried the weight of a thunderclap across the silent church. "I object," she said, her eyes locked on David, who stared back in utter, uncomprehending confusion. "I object because this man betrayed me." A collective gasp, sharp and unified, swept through the guests. The music stopped. The perfect day had just been fractured, and what began as a wedding was about to become a war. The weeks leading up to the wedding had seemed idyllic, a final peaceful stretch before the grand celebration. Just 10 days before the ceremony, Clara had to travel for a week-long national law conference in Chicago. It was a career-defining opportunity she couldn't miss, a chance to present a paper she had worked on for months, and David had been her biggest cheerleader, staying up late to help her practice her presentation and pushing her to go. She left with a lingering kiss and a promise to be back with plenty of time for the final preparations, entrusting her fiancé and her sister to manage the last-minute details like seating charts and vendor calls. She never once imagined the home she was leaving would become the setting for a quiet, creeping catastrophe. In her absence, David and Lena fell into an easy domestic routine. The first 2 nights were quiet, almost formal, as they navigated the space without Clara as their social anchor. By the 3rd night, a comfortable familiarity began to set in. They ordered Thai food, and David, knowing Lena was stressed about her final exams, spent an hour quizzing her on contract law, patiently explaining complex concepts with diagrams on a napkin. He was being kind, supportive, the future brother-in-law he was meant to be. But for Lena, watching him, so brilliant and attentive, that kindness perhaps felt like something more, something that she secretly craved for herself. The following evening, they decided on a movie night. They settled onto the large sectional sofa, a bowl of popcorn between them. The film was a tense, psychological thriller, and in the dark, the small space on the couch seemed to shrink. A shared glance during a jump scare that lingered a second too long. Laughter over a silly line of dialogue that felt a little too intimate. At one point, Lena shivered from the air conditioning, and David, without a second thought, draped a throw blanket over her shoulders, his fingers brushing her arm. It was a gesture of simple care, one he would have made for Clara 1,000 times. But in the charged quiet of the house, it felt different to her, a spark of something she misinterpreted as personal and significant. As the movie ended and the credits rolled, the sound of the television faded into the hum of the refrigerator. "Well, I'm heading up," Lena said softly, her voice a little unsteady. "Thanks for the movie." "Of course. Good night, Lena," David replied, his eyes still on the screen as he started cleaning up the popcorn bowl. The distinct, soft click of her bedroom door shutting was the only sound that broke the stillness of the night, an ambiguous punctuation mark at the end of a chapter no one was meant to read. When Clara returned home a day early, buzzing with excitement from her successful conference and eager to surprise her 2 favorite people, she was the one who got the shock. She walked into a house that felt heavy, the air thick with a silent, suffocating tension she couldn't name. The usual scent of coffee was replaced with something stale and sorrowful. She called out their names, but only silence answered. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She found Lena in her room, curled on her bed in the fetal position, still in yesterday's clothes, her face streaked with dried tears, and her eyes wide with a look of pure, hollowed-out trauma. Clara's heart plummeted. She rushed to her sister's side, her mind racing through 1,000 terrible possibilities. Lena's story tumbled out in broken sobs and panicked, disjointed whispers. She claimed that on the night they watched the movie, after she had gone to her room, David had followed. She alleged he was persistent, that he crossed a line, that he took advantage of her vulnerability, betraying not only his fiancée, but the very trust of their family. In that single horrifying moment, Clara's world split apart. The man she loved, the sister she had protected her whole life, and a version of the truth too heavy and too ugly to comprehend. She stumbled out of the room, her hands shaking, her breath catching in her throat, and confronted David, who was in the kitchen making coffee, oblivious, a smile on his face as he saw her. "You're home early," he started to say. but the words died on his lips when he saw the look on her face. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fury. As she repeated Lena's accusation, his expression shifted from confusion to horrified denial. "Clara, what? No, that's insane. I swear on my life, nothing happened. I went straight to our room after the movie." "She's not telling you the truth," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation as he reached for her. But Clara flinched away as if his touch would burn her. When she looked back at her sister, who had emerged in the hallway, a fragile, weeping figure, whispering, "He's lying. He betrayed you. He betrayed us, and he knows it." Clara was caught in an impossible crossfire. Her protective instinct, honed since childhood, warred with the deep foundational love she had for David. The story soon bled beyond their front door, first in hushed phone calls to their parents, then to their wedding party, and finally exploding into the public sphere. Friends took sides, the media catching wind of a scandal involving two prominent local lawyers on the eve of their wedding, pounced. The golden couple was now at war, and their private pain was about to become a very public spectacle. The courtroom was a circus. The case of Lena Miller versus David Harrington was the most sensational trial the city had seen in years. The media had dubbed it the wedding war. Flashing cameras greeted the family members at the courthouse doors, and the public gallery was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, all hungry for a glimpse of the drama. The space that had once been Clara and David's professional playground was now their personal battlefield, and the love that had once filled their home was now being presented as evidence, exhibit by painful exhibit. The prosecution, representing Lena, opened with a powerful, emotionally charged statement, painting a narrative of classic manipulation and abuse of trust. They portrayed David as a charming, calculating predator who took advantage of his fiancée's absence to prey on her vulnerable younger sister. To make matters infinitely more complicated and dramatic, David's defense was led by Rachel Scott, a top-tier attorney from a rival firm who was not only his professional peer, but also his ex-girlfriend from law school. Their past relationship had been amicable, but it added a layer of intense personal drama to the proceedings. Rachel, whose belief in the justice system was as fervent as her belief in David's innocence, took the case pro bono, seeing it as a gross miscarriage of justice in the making. She stood before the jury, her voice ringing with cool conviction. "The truth doesn't hide in rumors or tearful accusations," she argued in her opening. "It hides in fear, in jealousy, and in desperation. And these powerful emotions, members of the jury, can create lies just as easily as they reveal truths. This case is not about what happened, but about what someone desperately wanted to happen." Meanwhile, Clara sat in the gallery, a spectator at the demolition of her own life. She had taken a leave of absence from her firm, unable to function. She watched Rachel, a woman she had once competed against, now fighting with surgical precision for the man Clara was supposed to marry, and she felt a confusing mix of professional admiration for Rachel's skill and a deep personal anguish. Then she would look at Lena on the stand, recounting the alleged events with heartbreaking detail, and her heart would break for her sister, for the little girl she used to protect from scraped knees and schoolyard bullies. "How do I fight for justice?" she thought, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. "When my own heart is the crime scene?" If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's truly following till the end. The trial was a grueling, 2-week affair that dissected every aspect of their lives. Lena's testimony was the prosecution's centerpiece. Guided by her lawyer, she recounted the evening in vivid, emotional detail, her voice breaking at just the right moments. The jury was captivated. But under Rachel's precise, methodical cross-examination, small inconsistencies began to appear. Lena couldn't quite recall what they were talking about before she went to her room. She stumbled over the exact time of the alleged incident. She claimed he was forceful, yet she had no scratches or signs of a significant struggle. Rachel's strategy was risky. She had to sow doubt without appearing to bully a traumatized young woman. Friends of the family were called to the stand, their testimonies creating a confusing mosaic. One of Lena's friends tearfully recounted a panicked phone call from Lena the morning after the alleged assault, describing her as hysterical. A mutual friend of Clara and David's testified that David had seemed stressed and distracted that week, but had chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters. But the most damning evidence came from the doctor who had examined Lena 2 days after the incident. Dr. Alistair Finch, a man with a sterling reputation, took the stand and calmly presented his medical report. He pointed to photographs of faint, purplish bruises on Lena's upper arms, which he testified were consistent with being forcibly held. He spoke with an air of detached, scientific authority that made his conclusions feel irrefutable. Rachel's cross-examination was relentless. She questioned his methods, the timing of the exam, the ambiguity of the bruises. But Dr. Finch remained unshakable, a pillar of credibility. Against Rachel's advice, David insisted on his innocence so strongly he considered testifying, but Rachel convinced him it was too great a risk. "They won't see you, David," she had told him. "They'll see a lawyer trying to argue his way out of a conviction." The man who had built his life on words was forced into silence. The jury deliberated for 2 long days. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. The foreman, a middle-aged man who had watched the proceedings with an unreadable expression, stood and delivered the verdict. "On the charge of sexual assault, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A wave of shock and quiet sobs rippled through the courtroom. David stood motionless, his face drained of all color, as the judge sentenced him to 6 years in a state prison. The sharp, decisive fall of the gavel was more than a legal conclusion. It was the sound of every promise David and Clara had ever made to each other, shattering on the courtroom floor. Do you believe Lena or David? Tell us your thoughts. Who's really telling the truth here? Sometimes even the courtroom gets it wrong. Comment below and let's see what you think. The first 3 years of David's sentence were defined by an oppressive, suffocating silence that was heavier than any prison wall. He spent his days in the prison library, losing himself in the stoic logic of legal texts and classic literature. A ghost of the man he once was. In the first year, he descended into a deep depression, the sheer injustice of his situation eating away at him. He wrote letters to Clara, dozens of them at first, then tapering off to 1 a week. They were filled with professions of his innocence, with memories of their life together, with pleas for her to just look deeper, to use the brilliant legal mind he had fallen in love with to see the holes in the story. They all went unanswered, returned to him stamped refused. Clara visited him only once in the first few months. They sat opposite each other, separated by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass, the silence between them a tangible thing. She couldn't meet his eyes, her face a canvas of grief and confusion. After that one painful, wordless visit, she never returned. She couldn't reconcile the man she loved with the monster her sister described and a jury had convicted. Her life became a prison of its own. She threw herself into her work, taking on impossible cases and working 80-hour weeks, anything to numb the constant ache in her heart. She tried to support Lena, who had dropped out of law school, but a new, unbridgeable distance had formed between them, born of the shared trauma and the terrible secret Lena was keeping. Rachel, however, did not forget him. Her visits were a lifeline. They weren't romantic or sentimental. They were about the case. She brought him legal articles, discussed appeal strategies, and never once treated him like a convicted criminal. Her belief in his innocence was an unwavering flame in the darkness of his confinement. After the initial despair, David found a new, grim purpose. Using his knowledge, he started helping other inmates with their appeals, becoming an unlikely advocate within the prison walls, fighting for justice in the one place it seemed not to exist. It was the only thing that kept him sane. The break in the case came from an entirely different scandal, a headline that had nothing to do with David. Dr. Alistair Finch, the respected doctor who had authored Lena's medical report, the one whose testimony had sealed David's fate, was arrested. He was the center of a massive investigation into medical fraud, accused of taking bribes to falsify evidence in dozens of high-profile malpractice and insurance suits. When Rachel saw his face on the news, it was like a jolt of electricity. She remembered a flicker of arrogance in his eyes during the cross-examination, a smugness that had felt out of place. This was it. This was the loose thread she had been searching for. She immediately hired a private investigator, using her own money, and they poured all their resources into digging into Dr. Finch's past, specifically around the time of David's trial. They uncovered financial records showing a large untraceable cash deposit into the doctor's offshore account just one day after he filed his report on Lena. After weeks of relentless work, Rachel and the investigator cornered the doctor in his lawyer's office. Faced with irrefutable financial evidence and the threat of a much longer sentence for his other crimes, his professional facade cracked. He confessed. He admitted that Lena Miller, a desperate young law student, had approached him. She had paid him $50,000 to fabricate the entire report, to create evidence of a crime that had never occurred. Armed with the doctor's signed and videotaped confession, investigators from the DA's office confronted Lena. At first, she denied everything, her voice full of the same practiced indignation she had used on the stand. But when they played the doctor's confession and presented her with the bank withdrawal slips from her student loan account, her carefully constructed world collapsed. She broke down completely, her sobs raw and guttural. She confessed everything. She hadn't been assaulted. She had framed David. Her motive was as simple as it was tragic. She was deeply, obsessively in love with him, and she couldn't bear to watch him marry her sister. In her twisted logic, she believed if she could just get him away from Clara, he would eventually see her. The truth doesn't stay buried. It just waits, sometimes for years, like justice in disguise. Comment, truth always wins if you're still watching. Because sometimes the truth hides in silence, waiting for the right moment to break free. The day David was released, the sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. He walked out of the prison gates a different man, thinner, older, his shoulders slightly stooped, his eyes holding a deep, quiet pain that 3 years of wrongful imprisonment had etched into his soul. He squinted in the weak sunlight, a free man who felt anything but, and waiting for him, standing awkwardly by her car, was Clara. She was trembling, her face a mess of hope, shame, and 3 years of pent-up grief. As he approached, she stepped forward, her voice a fragile whisper. "David," she began, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "I am so sorry. I believed her. She's my little sister, David. I've been protecting her since she was a child. When she looked at me with that terror in her eyes after everything we hear about women not being believed, what was I supposed to do?" David stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a long moment there was no anger, only a profound, bottomless sadness. He spoke quietly, his voice raspy from disuse, but every word landed with devastating precision. "You didn't need proof to love me, Clara," he said. "You just needed faith. You, of all people, a lawyer, you know that the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. But you chose to believe the worst of me. That's not something a trial can fix." In that moment, Clara understood the true nature of her failure. It wasn't just that she had believed a lie. It was that she had failed to believe in him, the man she had vetted and chosen above all others. As they stood in that tense, heartbreaking silence, another car pulled up. Rachel stepped out. She didn't rush to him or say a word to Clara. She just met David's gaze, her expression soft and steady. She had been the one constant, the one person whose faith had been an unbreakable shield. After a moment she spoke, her words meant only for him, but loud enough for Clara to hear. "You don't owe anyone your heart, David," she said gently. "You don't owe anyone a second chance, but you do owe yourself peace." David looked from Clara, the woman who represented his past, a love now irrevocably tainted by doubt, her face wet with tears of regret. Then he looked to Rachel, the woman who represented unwavering loyalty and had literally fought for his future freedom. The choice was his. He could try to salvage the ruins of a love shattered by doubt, or he could walk toward a future built on a foundation of absolute trust. He turned back to Clara one last time, his decision made, his eyes conveying a sorrowful finality. "We ended the day you stopped believing in me," he said, the quiet words a definitive closing of their book. Then he turned and walked away from her, joining Rachel, who stood waiting. Together, without looking back, they left Clara standing alone in the shadow of the prison walls, a monument to a love that even the truth could not save. And so, The man once condemned walked free, not just from a prison cell, but from the suffocating weight of doubt and betrayal. In the end, the legal system corrected its mistake, and the truth won. But in the wreckage it left behind, love had unequivocally lost. Lena faced charges for perjury and filing a false report, her life and career ruined by her own jealousy. Clara was left in a prison of her own making, haunted by her lack of faith. And David, though exonerated, would forever carry the scars of his ordeal. Because while a lie can be exposed and a conviction can be overturned, trust, once it is fundamentally broken, can be proven in a courtroom, but never fully restored in the heart. True love, this story suggests, isn't tested in moments of comfort and celebration, but in the terrifying abyss of doubt. And faith is the only bridge that can cross it. If you were in Clara's shoes, faced with your distraught sister's tears and your fiancé's desperate denials, what would you have done? Would you believe the family you've known your whole life, or the person you promised to spend the rest of your life with? How does a person navigate a situation where both choices feel like an unbearable betrayal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And also subscribe for more timeless stories that will touch your heart and keep you thinking long after the video ends.